The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, CHD. It is Wednesday, April the 15th, 2026. We're live here at CHD TV. I'm really excited about the show today. I've been wanting to do something on this for so long. Now, if you are not subscribing to Dr. Marik, Dr. Paul Marik's Substack, you're missing out, because this is where I got the information to do this show. And it's about cholesterol. So we'll talk more about how to get involved in Dr. Marik's Substack. But for now, let's bring him on. Good morning, Dr. Marik. Thank you for being here.
Hey, Polly, how you doing? Good to be here.
Good to have you. Now, this is such an important subject. So I got this email. So when you subscribe to his Substack, you'll get an email to alert you when something new is coming out. And this is how you keep your information. And what came up is cholesterol. Is it a myth? And this is something I have been desperate for someone to break down, because Dr. Marik, we're seeing at Children's Health Defense here, children, really young children, being put on statins because apparently they have high cholesterol. I have people screaming at me that I drink raw milk and my cholesterol is going to kill me. So what's the truth about cholesterol? And actually, let's start with what even is cholesterol?
Yeah, so this has been a big scam probably for the last 60 years. And it's changed the way people think about diet, nutrition. It changed the way people go to the store. It changed the way they cook. And so the first question, what is cholesterol? So it's a type of fat, actually. It's an essential part of the cell membrane. It's an essential part of the human body. You need cholesterol to live. And there's some data that if in elderly people, if your cholesterol is too low, it reduces life expectancy. So cholesterol is an essential fat, or fatty acid is best to want. It has a steroid structure. It also forms the backbone of many of the hormones. So this really started off in the 1960s. Prior to this, people ate a diet in saturated fats. So let me just say the different types of fats. Maybe we should start there. So saturated fat it's a long chain of carbon molecules. It has no double bonds. It's called saturated, and it's mainly found in animal products, saturated fats. And then you have monounsaturated fats, which are found, so it has one double bond, usually at position number 9, and it's found in avocados and olive oil, and it's a healthy fat. And then you have polyunsaturated fats, which we'll talk about, PUFAs, and of which there's omega-3s and omega-6s. And the distinction is really important. And then there are trans fats. So the theory used to be that saturated fats cause your cholesterol to go up, and that causes heart attacks. So there was a fraudulent study done by Ansel Keys in 1959, 1960, the 7-county study. And what they showed is that if your intake of saturated fat was high, your cholesterol was high, and you got a heart attack. And Ansel Keys had a number of conspirators with him in this study, because they basically fudged the data. And so this was with the American Heart Association, it was with Procter & Gamble, and it was with other food companies that made processed fats, processed vegetable oils or seeds. And so basically they propagated what they call the diet heart hypothesis, that heart disease was caused by cholesterol, and the cholesterol was caused by taking in too much animal fats, saturated fats. And this has been perpetuated for 60 years, right until now. So there's this whole, you go to the store and you see low fat, everything is low fat. The truth of the matter is that it's completely wrong. It's the opposite. You actually don't want low fat. You want high fat. They got it completely and utterly wrong. So saturated fats are actually quite healthy and do not cause heart disease. They what causes heart disease was the vegetable oils and the seed oils that they told you to replace the saturated fat with. I mean, if you remember, everybody took margarine, which is a synthetic product of polyunsaturated omega-6s, and in fact was found to be profoundly pro-inflammatory. So basically what it did is it changed the complete way people approached food. The food they ate, the food they ordered at a store, the food they ordered at a restaurant. It changed the food manufacturing process. It completely changed food. And it was based on a myth, because heart disease is basically not caused by cholesterol. There, I've just said it. So cholesterol plays a very small role. You know, obviously, these are complicated biomedical systems. But basically, heart disease is a metabolic problem. So I've said it again, it's a metabolic problem. It's caused by insulin resistance, which is caused by eating too much sugar and carbohydrates, not saturated fat. So they got it completely wrong. They got it completely wrong. So what they force people to do, and they changed the food pyramid and they changed the way people thought of food, is they substituted animal saturated fat, eggs, bacon, cheese, milk, for processed food with glucose and fructose. And what that did was cause insulin resistance. And so basically what that means is that insulin, which is obviously, as people know, is a hormone to get glucose into the cell, the insulin doesn't work properly because of changes in the receptor. And the insulin levels go high, and this causes a pro-inflammatory state. It causes metabolic dysfunction, causes oxidative injury. So, and in fructose, which people don't realize this, is really a cellular poison. So, you know, there's high fructose corn syrup. Fruit juice has a lot of fructose. It's not metabolized by the body except the liver. So fructose goes to the liver and is converted to fat. And then it causes fatty liver and hepatic dysfunction. So what they did is they created this diet where people have processed foods, highly processed foods with fructose, glucose, and then seed oils. So seed oils are what are omega-6 fatty acids, which we briefly mentioned. So it's like soy oil and sunflower oil and corn oil. These are all vegetable oils. They're omega-6s. There you see them. Corn oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil, soybean oil. So what do? They cause severe inflammation. They're pro-inflammatory. They cause oxidative injury, and they're actually linked to cancer. So the American diet is highly processed now. when you go to the restaurant, things are cooked with these vegetable oils. There are vegetable oils in salad dressings. There's vegetable oils in much of the processed food. So what you want to do is go back to the way we ate before 1960. People ate a natural diet. I'm not saying that everything has to be carnivore, but there's nothing wrong with eggs. Eggs are perfect. An egg provides wonderful nutrition. Nuts and seeds and chia seeds and walnuts are really healthy. And you don't need to be scared of fats. And this whole cholesterol thing is somewhat of a myth. Cholesterol does play a small role, but it's not the predominant role. Heart disease and atherosclerosis is a metabolic disease due to inflammation and oxidative injury to the vasculature. And so people have to, they should not be obsessed by their cholesterol level. So if you really want to be healthy, what you should do, instead of measuring cholesterol, which in itself is meaningless, probably one of the most important things to measure is insulin. Because if your insulin level is high, it means you have insulin resistance and the metabolic syndrome. And that means you have to change your diet. There's no question. Americans eat, an awful diet. They eat too much. They eat all the time. They snack all the time. They eat processed foods. And by changing, the pharmaceutical companies don't like this, because you can become healthy by not taking medicine. The whole idea is not to take medicine. You change your diet. So basically what you want to do is eat food. So what is food? If it looks like food, then it's likely food. If it comes in a box or comes in a wrapper, that's food. If it comes in a box or a wrapper and has a big label, that's not food. That's processed synthetic chemicals. So we need to get back to basics. We need to eat real food. It must look like food. We need to cut out processed food. We need to cut out highly processed carbohydrates. We eat much too much sugar. In fact, humans can survive without any carbohydrates. It's an amazing fact. You need protein and you need fat. You don't need carbohydrates. So, for example, the diseases, most of the chronic diseases that we suffer from, and RFK is talking about, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, Alzheimer's disease, obesity, these NASH, which is fatty liver, these diseases are all caused by metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance. Nothing to do with cholesterol. So people should stop being obsessed by cholesterol. If you're going to measure something, there's something called the triglyceride HDL level. That's a much better predictor of heart disease. But what you want to do is you want to make sure your insulin level is low and you don't have insulin resistance. Does that make some kind of sense, Polly?
Yes, it makes absolute sense. But I've got a few questions for you. Number one, you said they got it so wrong. Why did they get it wrong? Is it because they wanted to sell statins? Is this like selling drug number?
It was partly engineered by Procter and Gamble to sell vegetable oils, because the sale of vegetable oils skyrocketed. And then in the 70s, statins came about. And so, you have these two camps. People think that they're completely toxic and you should never take them. And I got a few comments, people say you should never take a statin. And then there's the pharmaceutical industry believes that most that humans have a genetic defect and don't make statins, and that everybody needs a statin. And obviously that's wrong. Now, there is a small group of people who benefit from statins, but the problem is, the answer to most of these issues is not a pill. Health doesn't come in a pill. It comes in lifestyle change. And the most important is diet. It sounds very simplistic and basic, but it's really true. Diet is the cornerstone of health. And then you layer on top of that some exercise, good sleep habits, and that makes health. Taking a tablet does not make you healthy. And putting children on statins is evil. So maybe there are certain children who have a genetic defect and you would maybe consider it, but we have a childhood obesity problem. And it's because of what we feed children. We should take sodas away. We should take fruit juice away. A happy meal does not make for a healthy, happy child. We have a completely inverted way of feeding kids. They eat in the car, they eat fries, and all of these are cooked in vegetable oil. It's carbohydrates and vegetable oils. So we feed kids toxic food, and that's why we have obese kids, and that's why we have sick kids. We should feed them, and obviously breakfast cereals are synthetic processed food. It's not a food. So, bacon and eggs are really healthy. So parents really need to think about what they're feeding their children, because it makes a big difference. It sets a pattern for the rest of their life. And to give a kid a statin, I think the child has to have a severe genetic disease predisposing them to massive high cholesterol. Otherwise, it's due to diet. It's due to all the drive-through foods and the bad foods that they eat. You need to go to your closet in the kitchen and throw out all the processed food, the chips and the snacks and the potato chips and all the processed food. If it comes in a box and has a label, it's not food. It's quite simple. And so we should be feeding kids food.
Dr. Marik, quick question coming in. What about potatoes that come out, that people are growing themselves out of the ground? I mean, is that carbohydrate, starchy, whatever?
So obviously it's carbohydrate. Potatoes per se, I wouldn't overdo it in potatoes. Potatoes are okay as long as it's, cooked maybe in olive oil or butter. Butter's fine. And obviously you don't want to overdo it because it is a carbohydrate. And the problem with there's a very good study which looked at mortality in 18 countries, and they looked at the intake of the type of foods. So the total fat, if you took in fats, your mortality went down. Saturated fat went down. There we go. This is a nice study. You can see on the extreme left, it's mortality, and it's where the food is coming from. So fat, it goes down. Saturated fat, it goes down. Monounsaturated fat, it goes down. Right at the end, you can see where it goes up is carbohydrates. As you increase the percentage of carbohydrates in your diet, you die. And it's complete opposite of what the cholesterol, fat, heart diet theory. It goes completely against it. So you can see as your intake of carbohydrates goes up, your risk of dying goes up because you get insulin resistance, which causes inflammation and oxidative injury. So unfortunately, we've had it completely wrong. They fooled us. The dietary pyramid was completely upside down. The American heart fooled us. The cardiologists fooled us. The pharmaceutical industry fooled us. The food industry fooled us. So you still go to the store and you see low fat. Why in heaven's name would you buy something that's low in fat? You actually want it to be high in fat, because if it's low in fat, it's high in sugar and fructose. There's no question. I mean, that's what it is. So this complete obsession with low fat must stop. The big grocery stores should clean out their shelves of low fat. There's no place for low fat, because low fat is high sugar. And as we said, that's the problem, what causes insulin resistance.
Okay, Dr. Marik, the problem is that the people are being frightened by their doctor. They're being scared. They're scared because their doctor, I mean, I just spoke to my sister. I know she doesn't watch the show, so I can say this. And she lives in England. She just got a letter because she's of a certain age. And they're like, "What? You're very healthy. We can see that. But we do have statins in our clinic. And, it's a prevention thing. If you want to come in and pick your statins up, you will not die of a heart attack or anything else." Obviously, that's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. But that's an example of how people are petrified that they are going to die. And then, so here's my question to you, or what I'm going to ask you to do in a minute. And then they say people like Children's Health Defence and their doctors are full of quacks. Could you, Dr. Marik, please tell the people your qualifications?
So what you say is true. So the only way is they can educate themselves, because the public has been brainwashed and doctors have been brainwashed. So, I mean, I'm not here to brag, but I was board certified in 4 specialties, including medicine, critical care, nutrition, and critical and neurocritical care. That was until ABIM found me to be spreader of misinformation. I've published over 500 peer-reviewed papers, so I do have a reasonable scientific background. And so I think people need to realize how we've been indoctrinated. Most of what the medical institutions tell us is wrong. It's perpetuated by pharmaceutical greed. The pharmaceutical companies have no interest in making people healthy. In fact, it's counterproductive to the bottom line. So, for example, type 2 diabetes, which is rampant, is a treatable disease. If you change your diet and the way you eat, you will cure type 2 diabetes. But they don't want you to know that, because then you will stop using their expensive drugs, including their GLP-1 agonists, which cost over $2,000 or $3,000 for these injections. That they want to keep you as unhealthy as they can for as long as they can, so that you take their medication. They don't tell you that type 2 diabetes, you can see this gentleman injecting a GLP-1, is a treatable disease. We're not talking about type 1. Type 1 is different. And that's also become a problem. But type 2 is a pandemic, and it's due to insulin resistance due to bad diet. So how do I know this? Well, I know from looking at the literature extensively, and I was a type 2 diabetic, and I'm no longer a type 2 diabetic because I changed my diet. Isn't that such a remarkable thing? All I did was basically changed my diet. And that's what people need to do, because hypertension, heart disease, diabetes, fatty liver, autoimmune disease, dementia, all of these chronic diseases of Western civilization are due to insulin resistance, the metabolic syndrome, and the way we eat and the food we eat. So we have to, taking a pill does not make you healthy. This is this myth. You've got to take a tablet and that's how you get healthy. That's not true. That's a lie. You get healthy by lifestyle choices, and diet, exercise, and sleep are really the cornerstone of this. It's a fundamental change. There is a place for some supplements like vitamin D. I think people should take vitamin D. Most people are vitamin D deficient, and it's a very important anti-inflammatory drug. If you are insulin resistant, then you may want to take metformin and berberine, which improve the function of insulin. So there are adjuncts you can take. So these are natural supplements. These are not, metformin is, in fact, I get metformin. It costs me zero. I actually get it from the pharmacies. With my insurance, it's actually free, believe it or not. Nobody's making thousands of dollars. The berberine is very inexpensive. The vitamin D, which is, I think, critical. I buy a year's supply of high quality vitamin D for like $15. So you can see what we're talking about here. And I think the importance of this is that the US is a small part of the world. We have to think, in a more broader context of middle and lower income countries that are also suffering from severe obesity. The remarkable fact is the US makes 5% of the world population, yet we consume 55% of prescription drugs. Does that make any sense? It just tells you the problem. And guess what the most prescribed drug in this country is? The statin, atorvastatin. It's truly astonishing that a third of the American population, 35% of Americans, take a statin. It's the most commonly prescribed and most commonly used drug. And it's like people think it's normal to have statins circulating in your bloodstream because we have a deficiency of statin. And so to start kids on statins because they eat a bad diet is insanity. I think Einstein would call that insanity.
Dr. Marik, just before we tell everyone where to follow your Substack and stuff, describe what you think. So let's use me, for example. What should I do when I get up in the morning? Do I drink coffee? Do I not drink coffee? Do I drink lemon juice? What am I, squeeze lemon juice? What is your ideal? This is not giving medical advice. This is just friend to friend. What should I do to have that perfect day?
Yeah, so I'll tell you what I do as an example. So there's something called intermittent fasting or time-restricted feeding. Because if you think of it, we evolved to eat episodically. Most Americans eat 12 or 13 times a day. They snack all the time. It's a completely unhealthy way. The body wasn't designed. And you should not have breakfast like a king. That's a complete myth. So what you want to do is miss breakfast. Coffee is fine. Actually, there's a very strong association between the intake of coffee and cancer. Coffee reduces the risk of cancer. It reduces the risk of dementia. The other beverage that is very good for you is green tea. Green tea has ECGC, which is profoundly healthy. So, I start the day with a cup of coffee with high fat milk. There we go. Specifically has fat in it. And then I don't eat anything until the afternoon. And then I have an eating window of, 2 to 4 hours. And the rest of the time I don't eat. And it sounds absurd and bizarre, but that's the way we evolved to eat. And I've got used to it. It takes time to progress. So what I would advise people to do is have an eating window. That's why it's called time restricted, like between 12 and 6 o'clock, which is 6 hours. You shouldn't eat for at least 4 hours before you go to sleep. That's a really bad thing to do. And then with time, you can narrow that window. You can keep the window at like 6 hours. And you'll find that so people who can't do this, that people say, I can't do it. Well, the reason they can't do it is they are addicts. You are an addict. You are a carbohydrate and processed food addict. You are no different from a cocaine and heroin addict. And you have to consider yourself a food addict and you treat yourself the way you would a cocaine or heroin addict, because that's what you are. If you can't do that, you are addicted to processed foods. You're nothing more than an addict. So you need to break that addiction and change your diet. So we eat too much, we eat too many times, and we eat too much processed food. So it's not complicated, Polly.
No, it's not. But some people are saying, well, I can't get my children to do that. I have to pack them a school lunch. What am I supposed to put in their box if we can't have all these, it's not fair on them because their friends are eating all these little packets of chips and I don't know what. It's that kind of conversation. And I know you're going to answer this very forthright, just like you did. You told us, well, food addicts, everybody, we've got to sort ourselves out.
Yeah, I think you've got to be honest with your kids. You need to explain to them. And I think with time, so I was a food addict. I liked cake and chocolates and chips. Now I have lost the taste for it because you actually like the taste of, healthy foods. So, give them carrots, give them vegetables. You can be inventive and give them healthy foods. And, I think you just explain to them that, and if they say, well, my friends are doing this, well, you tell them they are poisoning themselves. That's what they're doing. And I think your kids will get used to eating healthy food. You have to be honest. You tell the truth. And that's why I think the schools have an important role in being role models and changing the diet of kids' diet. Too much bread, it's all completely processed carbohydrates.
Yeah, this has been fantastic. I love this. So basically, summarizing this up, cholesterol is a myth with statins, high cholesterol.
So the saturated fat, cholesterol, heart axis is a myth. You should not worry about your cholesterol. If you're going to worry about something, worry about your triglycerides, worry about your insulin level. That's much more important in terms of metabolic health than cholesterol. Cholesterol became convenient because there was a tablet you could take to reduce cholesterol. And as we see, it's the most commonly prescribed drug. So you can see how powerful and forceful this marketing campaign has been.
It's terrible, such a big lie. Dr. Marik, it's really important to me that our viewers understand that they need to follow you on Substack because you really do, because your information is critical to everybody. So how do they do that?
Yeah, so, you should never believe any single person. I think people need to investigate for themselves. Right. If you even go to AI or some place that's somewhat reputable and do some reading, don't read promotional stuff and see if I'm wrong. You can challenge me. I'm quite happy. So this is my Substack here. It's it's https at paulmarik.substack.com. You can Google it.
They'll find it. And there's lots of information on prevention of cancer, and cancer is really so important because last time you were on, you were telling us these frightening stats of 1 in 3 men will get cancer, 1 in 2 women, was it?
1 in 2 men, 1 in 3 women. And part of it has to do with diet and insulin resistance and omega-6 fatty acids. It all comes back to the same thing. So they're all linked. Cancer, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, hypertension, Alzheimer's disease. These are all linked to bad lifestyle, insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome. And so to a large degree, cancer is preventable by modifying your diet and adopting other healthy habits.
Well, Dr. Marik, thank you so much for coming on this morning and giving us your amazing knowledge. I know our viewers absolutely adore you, and we'll be following you on Substack, and we hope to get you back on again soon because...
Yeah. So people should, if they don't believe me, and I think you should be skeptical of anything you hear, do some, we have a brain. We should use our brain and think logically and think deductively and try and be objective and don't believe everything that you're told.
Yeah, I learned that lesson the hard way. Um, Dr. Marik, thank you. You're amazing. And we hope to have you back on again soon.
Thanks, Polly. Thanks for being here. Thanks for having me here.
We love having you here. Right, everybody, we're going to go to People's Study story. This is Belinda Moran, and her son had Hep B and vitamin K. So I'm pretty sure you know what's going to happen now. But anyway, let's run this. And if you have a story, do please contact us at Children's CHD TV, because we do need to. It's critical that we hear your stories. So chd.tv, contact us, and we will get your story down. Follow us as well, please, on X, because we've had to set up on our own. So we are CHD TV live on social media, on X. So we look forward to seeing you over there. And you'll see clips of Dr. Marik and the shows that'd be good to share. But pray big, stand firm, never settle, and we will see you tomorrow by Natural Rebellion. Everyone, we're going to be joined now by Belinda Moran, who has a very important story about her second child. And I know that this is not a story that's isolated. There's many more people out there who is going to understand this. So, Belinda, welcome to the show. And tell us about your second son. The story is quite incredible, this story.
Okay, so my second child was born November 3rd, 1995. He was born normal, nothing red flags in the delivery. Pregnancy was normal, no issues at all. I worked right up to the day I delivered him, and he got the vitamin K. He weighed 8 pounds, 10 ounces. He got the vitamin K shot at birth, and the next morning or the next day, we were to be released home. And when the nurse was bringing him down to me, she had just given him the hepatitis B. And when they asked me about it, I thought to myself, well, my other son didn't have that. So I went along with it. I didn't know any better. Didn't know about vaccine injury at all. Thought I was doing the right thing. And he did get the hepatitis B. And she was wheeling him down for me to prepare him to leave. And she said, I'm going to take him back to the nursery for observation. I don't like the way he's tremoring. So with that, she took him away from my room. My husband came in with my son, Ryan, and said, where's the baby? And I said, well, the nurse took him back for observation. Shortly thereafter, she came, wheeled him in the bassinet and said, oh, he's okay to go. So we went home and things seemed to be going fine. You know, he was progressing fine. And then at the 1 month visit, he got another hepatitis B. And then it was after that one, I started seeing seizure-like activity. He was gnawing on his hands, like he was eating a corn cob or something. He was very, very pale. You could see he was fair too, very blonde, white hair, and you could see all the veins and things in his head. His head was experiencing a rapid head growth. So that was at the 1 month. By the 2 month, I really started seeing some weird things that my other son did not, exhibit.
Right, but Belinda, did he have more vaccines at the 2 month visit?
He did. Sadly, the pediatrician blew me off when I mentioned the cold hands and feet. He started projectile vomiting around 4 o'clock, 4:30 in the afternoon. He was at the babysitter actually the day he arrested or collapsed. And she had said he had 3 episodes of projectile vomiting. Meanwhile, nobody else around us had been sick with the flu or, anything like that. So I thought that was weird. And I just, I picked him up that day from daycare and he was lethargic. But he did drink some during the night. And then I thought I'd wait till morning and then decide whether to take him into the pediatrician or what have you. In the morning, I did call the pediatrician and let them know that he had thrown up the day before. And he said to me on the phone, "Oh, it's probably just the flu." So I said, "Well, okay." And then he said, "Call back if you have any other concerns." So about half an hour after my phone call to the pediatrician, he had a grand mal seizure. I heard a loud scream, and I think they call it the encephalactic scream. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
Somebody had said to me, when the toxins hit the brain, it's like a cat screeching, high pitched scream.
We call it the DTaP scream because
Okay.
DTaP, yeah.
That's what he got. He got the tetraimmune. I've seen it spelled different ways in his records. It's tetraimmune, which was the DPT and HIB in one shot, and the oral polio that day. But what the pediatrician missed on that 2-month visit was his exploding head growth. He was right off the chart. He went, he was in the 90th percentile, but on the chart that I have from the pediatrician, he's above the 100. He's right on that 100 mark. So anyway, with that, when the pediatrician wanted to see him after lunch, now this was probably 10:30, 10 in the morning or so, when I had reached out again with that seizure that he had. My husband was on his way home from work because my son Ryan was 4 at the time and wild. So I was trying to avoid taking him with me. But in the end, my husband said, "Oh no, let's go," in the car. We didn't even wait for 911 or anything. He's like, "Let's go." So we went to a walk-in Medi Center place, and I had Kieran in my arms. It was freezing cold. And because he did that arching again in the infant carrier. So when I ran him into the reception area, I said, "My son just had a seizure," and they saw the bulging fontanelle and took him right back. It just went to hell. They called 911 trying to get an ambulance. They rushed him to the trauma center in New Brunswick. First, they stopped at St. Peter's because he stopped breathing, I believe, in the ambulance. And the instructions to my husband and myself were to meet the ambulance at Robert Wood Johnson. Those hospitals are fairly close together. So we were at the emergency room in New Brunswick at Robert Wood, and we were like, "Where's the ambulance?" Like, I heard the sirens going, and then I didn't hear them. And I just didn't know why we didn't hear the sirens any longer. It's because they took another way and went to the hospital they were closest to. Apparently, he coded while at St. Peter's, and I guess they brought him back. And the pediatrician, who didn't want to see us in his office, showed up, and he said, "What do you think happened?" And I said, "Well, the only thing that's happened is he got vaccinated." And he says, "Oh, vaccines wouldn't cause this." So anyway, I thought, all right. So that kind of went, to the back of the room, back of my brain. And next thing I knew was we were being accused, "Your son is massively bleeding in the brain." And when I questioned the doctor, "Well, what could cause that?" And she said to me, "Oh, like somebody hit him in the head with a baseball bat." And the neurosurgeon was in the room. We were in her office, and he just dropped his head to the floor. Like, I knew something was off with the whole thing. And I said, "A baseball bat?" I said, "No, that didn't happen." So at that meeting, she had said that the authorities would be informed or contacted, and they were. I stayed at the hospital with him. He was on life support. They had actually drilled a hole in the skull to relieve the pressure of the bleeding. And so he was bleeding out of the brain while they were transfusing him. He had 3 transfusions. He was admitted on a Thursday afternoon. And by Sunday evening, we had a phone, after we had just come in from the hospital, the treating physician that day had called us to say they had thought he suffered a brain death. So my husband and I started talking about organ donation, whatever. And 40 minutes later or so, he called back and said, scratch that. There may be some brain activity. So the next morning, they were scheduling him for a nuclear test, to determine the condition of the brain. So the next morning, when we got to his room in the ICU, he wasn't there. I'm like, where is he? And they had said, oh, they're just bringing him back up from that last test. And he kind of turned around and they decided he wasn't brain dead. So, so at this point, that was day 4, and they were weaning him from the oxygen. They just kept on with this. Somebody abused him, which was not the case. He had been at a daycare the day he arrested, and she was questioned, and her daughters were questioned. And they decided it wasn't them. It had to be the last person home with him, who was me. So I was their target. We did polygraph. We were interrogated 5.5 hours after the Thursday night. So that was on the Friday. They took me away from the hospital with 2 DCF workers, a detective from my town, and the prosecutor's office. The detective from the prosecutor's office had me walk through the streets of New Brunswick in the middle of winter. We had just had a terrible snowstorm. I didn't have my coat. I didn't have my purse or anything because they were going to take me to a conference room. And in the end, they decided not to do that. They changed their minds when we got onto the elevator. So my husband's in the ICU with my son, and they took me away from the hospital, had me walk to the prosecutor's office and sat me down. And then I went through everything that had happened or not happened that day. And they just kept saying to me, face it, admit it, you did it, you shook him. And I'm like, no. And I stood my ground. And it was about 5.5 hours of them, basically telling me that I should have called 911 after he threw up at the babysitter, and, just put everything I said. They had some better idea or something else. And with that, after 5.5 hours, they got up from the table and flung a legal pad at me and a pen and said, oh, well, maybe it's easier for you to write your confession down. Some people can, write their confessions down. And so anyway, they left the room and I started kind of doodling on the thing. I didn't know what to do. And they came in and they said, well, what's this? And I said, well, nothing happened. I'm not writing anything down that didn't happen. So, and then I remember saying to them, listen, if you want me to make something up, I'll do that. But I'm not admitting to something I didn't do. And with that, they jumped up from the table and left the room. At some point, they had gone back to the hospital and brought my husband to the prosecutor's office. And they only questioned him for about an hour, is your wife suffering from postpartum depression? And how does she handle stress and all kinds of things like that? And he was very supportive in my favor. And if anything, I handle stress better than most. So, of course, we had to get a defense attorney. And what they didn't know is we had connections. My husband at the time worked for an assemblyman in New Jersey. So we had a political connection. And then with the neurosurgeon connection was through, are you familiar with the Royal Academy of Dance?
Well, yeah, I definitely know what it is. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm actually a New Zealander. I'm an American, but my dad was in the Navy. So my mom taught dance, and she's, RAD trained and everything. Of course, that's what I was. And at the teacher's courses, she met a woman from Scotland whose husband, she said to my mom, was a pediatric neurosurgeon that traveled the world educating other doctors. So when all this went down with Karen, one of the nurses was mentioned that she had worked at CHOP in Philly. And it dawned on me, I said, oh, do you happen to know Dr. Bruce? And she turned around from the computer and she said, Derek Bruce? I said, yes. Do you know him? And she said, yes, I worked with him at CHOP. And she said, do you know him? And I said, well, I know his wife. So anyway, I shared that with my mom. I said, do you think I should call him? And she said, yes, call him. So I called Dallas and I got his wife. I told her what was going on. And she said, is he still bleeding in the brain? And I said, yes. And then she said, did he have bruises or fractures or anything? And I said, no. And she said, something's not right here. But her husband was out of the country at a conference or something. But she said, when he comes back, I'll share with him what's going on. So anyway, I never heard from him. And then about 2.5 weeks after my son had been at Robert Wood, they wanted my consent to send to NIH to test his blood looking for something rare. And when I signed it, I handed it back and I said to the doctor, so in other words, you're telling me you don't know what's wrong with him. Oh, that's not what we're saying. And I said, really? So anyway, when she left the ICU, there was a nurse sitting by the bed. And I said, well, what's that all about? And the nurse said to me, they don't have a clue. They have no idea what's going on with your son. I said, oh, really? So we've hired a criminal defense attorney. We were interrogated. You took our 4-year-old out of the house, and you're telling me now they don't know what's going on. So with that, I left the hospital and called Dallas again and shared with him, the doctor, what I had learned that morning. And he said, what's the hospital's phone number? So he called and he spoke with the treating physician. She told him where the bleeding was and how they were treating him. And he said to her on the phone, you know, this is not child abuse. And she said, no, we didn't think it was. He said, you know, this is not a shaken baby case. And she said, we didn't think so. And he said, I'm encouraging you to stop this investigation. With that, he called me. He said, go to the hospital right away and get copies of the first scans done. That's where the diagnosis comes from. The very first MRIs or CAT scans they do. So I went to Robert Wood and I got the copies. I sent them overnight mail to Dallas and they were reviewed in Dallas. And at some point during that, when they reviewed it, one of the doctors called me from Dallas and said, get him the hell out of Robert Wood Johnson. And they recommended either CHOP in Philly or UMDNJ. And if we had gone to Philly, we would have had to have gone before a judge because we were taking him over the state line. So we chose Newark. And the neurosurgeon there was pediatric and adult neurosurgery. Dr. Carmel, his name, he's retired now. And I called him and he learned some of the backstory from the doctors in Dallas. And he said, I have one bed in the ICU. If you want it, you got to move right now. So we put in for the transfer and my son was transferred to Newark. The receiving nurse in Newark, the nurse that rode in the ambulance with him from New Brunswick, said to her, this is a shaken baby. This is a shaken baby child abuse case. And the nurse in Newark said, no, it's not. it's a intraventricular hemorrhage or whatever. So they had put the word out. Like I remember the doctor saying to me on the phone, taking him out of Robert Wood Johnson is not going to change his diagnosis. And I think I said to her something like, oh, they've already changed the diagnosis or something. So anyway, we got him to Newark. I met with Dr. Carmel, with my husband, and he just basically said in 32 years of pediatric neurosurgery, never seen anything like this. I will go back through every JAMA medical article I can find to see if I come across another one, but he did not feel that there was anything like it that he had ever seen before. So with that, he was in Newark. Once the bleeding, subsided or it had stopped by then, they did the VP shunt. So he was shunted for hydrocephalus. And then he was at Robert Wood for about 3.5 weeks. Then he was transferred to Newark for, I think it was about 5 weeks. And then from Newark, we transferred him to the residential rehab where they did post hospital stays for therapy and things like that. And then after that 5 weeks, he's been home in our home with a few, shunt surgeries and things like that. So we were not able to be compensated because nobody was arrested. They can investigate you and put you through paying for an attorney and all of that with no proof. And doctors that have seen the scans and not one shred of medical evidence for them to say that he was the victim of shaken baby syndrome or non-accidental inflicted head trauma. So no evidence of that at all. So my question or my concerns goes right back to the vitamin K shot. And then when you hit them with the vaccine in less than 24 hours, I have read that the vaccines deplete vitamin C and vitamin K anyway. So if you gave him a vitamin K shot the day before you're giving him something that's going to deplete the vitamin K, isn't that a problem? I don't know. So with that's where I think his problem started, right after that first vitamin K, and then followed up with the hepatitis B. And with all the talk with, I think it's Rand Paul's on about the vitamin K, shouldn't be given at birth, which I agree, and all of that. I think that's the issue. And then not to mention the DPTH that he got. I believe there's 17 deaths and 53 life-threatening events with that.
So Linda,
So
how old is he now?
30.
And how is he doing now?
Well, sadly, about 10 years ago, we had a shunt issue, and he's never been the same after that last surgery. Prior to the last, he was in a hyperbaric study in New York when he was about 3. So we did hyperbarics there. We did hyperbarics in Canada, over in Tarpon Springs in Florida. So we've done a lot of hyperbarics. We even have done stem cells in Ecuador twice, and then again in Mexico. So he was taking steps in the gait trainer. He was starting to use his arm to drink his sippy cup, playing with toys. And after that last shunt surgery, it all kind of disappeared. So here we are. He's 30. There are no services. There's nowhere to send them to this level of disabilities, whatever you want to say. So he's basically here with me. I have a caregiver that comes every once in a while. Not every once in a while. What am I talking about? She comes about 3 to 4 days a week for anywhere from 4 to 6 hours. And that's it. And I'm a widow too now. So my husband passed away 8 years ago. So now I'm doing it by myself.
Yeah, that's terrible. Linda,
Yeah.
and you mentioned that when this happened, did they take your 4-year-old away as well?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Seriously, so you're in the hospital, dealing with this awful
Yeah.
situation, and then they took your 4-year-old. Where did they take him?
Okay. So I think he was already at my mom's. I think my husband brought him over there so that he could come back to the hospital or something. But he was at my mom's house. And after the interrogation, they said, well, and they slammed the table with their fists. If you don't admit it right now, you'll never see your son in your house again. And if you don't admit it right now, you'll never see the baby in your house again. Meanwhile, he's on life support, Yeah. Okay. So I said, well, if that's the way it's going to be, that's what it's going to have to be. I'm not admitting to something I didn't do. And with that, they went to two of the DCF workers went to my mom's house and kind of interviewed my mom and sister. And my son Ryan was there. And they started asking him questions like, what they would hold something up and say, what's this? Or what color is this? I don't know what they thought they were trying to achieve with that. But yeah, he was at my mom's house. And Kevin and I were not allowed to be around him without another adult in the room. Just silliness, just silliness. And then when it appeared they screwed up. I remember calling DCF or something, and they said, "Oh, does Ryan want to go home? We think he can go home now." So I think he was at my mom's about 10 days. And he had never been away from us. The only night he had ever been away from us was the night I gave birth. He was at my mom's house. So it was to do that when your child is near death, one, with no proof, or I don't know. I guess what it is, it's these doctors practicing outside their level of expertise, or you did a two-hour course in shake and baby syndrome and you know everything. I don't know. But yeah, they just rushed to judgment. They hadn't done any tests at all. They did check him for meningitis, and that was negative. The clotting, blood clotting, no issues with bleeding disorders or anything of that nature. So what was it? The only thing he got were the shots.
Belinda, your story is so important. Thank you so much for telling us about it. What would your advice be to the young mum that was listening now?
Don't do it. Don't do it. It's not worth it. And, you know, after this all happened, and I finally had the guts to say no more with the shots, we never had strep throat, colds, like ear infections, never again. So my son now that's 30, he's going to be 35 soon. He got vaccinated up to about age 4, and then I cut him off from all the shots as well. And yeah, he missed 2 days of high school his senior year. And that was because I let him stay home for mental health day or something like that. But they were never sick. So, and the pediatrician's office that where I was on the bus with you, Dr. Franz, do you remember her in Orlando?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So when I found her, I started taking Kieran to her. I remember I had it like my testimonial, I had it all written out for her because it's such a long and complicated kind of story. And the first she starts reading, she's like, "Yeah, there it is, that hepatitis B. Oh, yeah." She's like, and I'm thinking to myself, where have you been my whole life, to get a pediatrician to agree with you? But just we were just in the hospital right at Christmas. He actually aspirated on some food. He was having a seizure, and he was just not himself. So I took him into the hospital, and they admitted him. His sodium was really high. So he was in the ICU, and I went round and round with this intensivist doctor, and he was trying to tell me that the hepatitis B at birth actually prevents cancer. And I said, "Well, that's bullshit, and you know it." Like, come on. So anyway, I shared a little bit more with him, and about, because what he did was he was able to pull up scans from 20, the ones that they had just done over here at the hospital in 2005. And he said to me, the ventricles are huge. There were two that were really huge, and they're about the same in all that space of time. And he said, "I got to be honest with you. What I'm looking at in the bed does not match these scans." And I said, "Well, we've done hyperbarics." He said, "No, he should not be doing, he should basically not even be with us," is pretty much what he was saying based on the scans. And then I said to him, I shared a little bit more about the bleeding in the brain. And then he said to me, when I mentioned the NIH, he said, "You know what? I think you're right. I think this is a vaccine injury." Yeah.
Wow. Belinda, thank
Yeah.
you so much for telling this story. It's so important. And
Okay.
do keep us updated as life goes on with how it is, and keep
Okay.
talking about this very important story. I mean, what you went through emotionally as well, I can't even imagine.
Oh, yeah. No, it's And like I was a I had, I don't know, 10, 15, 3 and 4 year olds, talk about stress or the recital, getting these kids on the stage. I mean, I could handle stress. And but this was beyond. I mean, this is just, I've met, grandparents accused of this, teachers, like not low information or, you know, um, educated people being accused of this.
Belinda, thank you.
Yeah.
And I tell you what, I've always been saying this to my children and to my friends' children: do not babysit vaccinated babies, because if something happens,
Oh yeah. Yep.
your kid is going to go to jail for something they didn't do.
No, I just wish that one day there might be justice, because he never got any government assistance like till he was 18. SSI, big whoop. But all those years, and now, being a widow, I don't have that extra income of my husband or anything. I mean, the whole thing just sucks.
That's unfair, Belinda.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for doing it today.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.